Hello and welcome to The Hot Seat with Violet Gonda, the program that puts the newsmakers in the spotlight to deal with the tough issues relating to Zimbabwe. So who's in the hot seat this week?
Hello and welcome on the Hot Seat program. My name is Violet Gonda and my guest today is political scientist Dr. Ibbo Mandaza, who is going to give us his analysis on the recent cabinet reshuffle by President Robert Mugabe. Welcome on the program, Dr. Mandaza.
Thank you.
Some observers have said the recent reassignments and new appointments by President Mugabe only serve two purposes, and that is to manage the succession and win elections. Do you agree with this?
This reshuffle is an exercise in power on the part of President Mugabe. All reshuffles are always an exercise in power, but what is significant about this one is that it's the first since September 2015, and it's happening against a backdrop of a vicious power struggle, a succession struggle. And therefore it has to be understood in those terms. It is less about performance-related criteria, which is often used as a measure in reshuffles, than an exercise in power and designed to contain those who are viewed as a threat to the establishment or to Mugabe's own power base.
Who has been given the most powerful positions? In other words, who are the biggest winners and the biggest losers?
There is this perception, often more real than imaginary, of factions, Lacoste, or the Emerson Mnangagwa faction, and the G40, which is seen to be led by the First Lady. But in my view, I've always said that the G40 is Mugabe himself. And therefore, in terms of the balance of forces, we can conclude by saying that the Lacoste has lost big time, has been weakened big time, and that conversely, the G40 has been enhanced significantly in terms of the balance of forces.
It's interesting that you're saying the G40 is Mugabe himself, but some people think the leader of or the architect of the G40 is Professor Jonathan Moyo. Do you think Jonathan Moyo had a hand in the putting together of this cabinet? Because this all seems well thought through.
It's possible, but basically the head of G40 in inverted commas is Mugabe himself, and it might be that he has utilized those close to him, the so-called G40, the Jonathan Moyos, the Kasikwes and so forth, to strengthen his position.
Many people expected Vice President Emerson Mnangagwa to be fired, but all that has happened is that he's lost his justice ministry. How significant is this?
It's very significant, especially given the backdrop of the fact that Mnangagwa does not hold a constituency position. Given the changes made in 2014 in the Zanu constitution, from one in which the vice presidents were elected along with the president in the party. These are appointees. So from the outset, from 2015 or 14 onwards, the vice president's posts have been deflated immensely as appointees of the president. And significantly, or ironically rather, Emerson Mnangagwa and I believe Jonathan Moyo were the architects of that new constitution, which was designed primarily to deal with Joyce Mujuru, who had been elected as a vice president in the previous Congress. So yes, Emerson Mnangagwa is certainly much weaker in his own right, without the key portfolio of justice, which is, as you know, is the leader of the House of Assembly of the ruling party. Which is also the ministry in charge of the judicial system. It's the ministry in charge of elections.
Why wasn't he just dumped outright, like what Mugabe did with Joyce Mujuru? Why play these games? Why not just get rid of him?
Well, there appear to be two issues. The first is that Emerson Mnangagwa seems to have chosen not to go the Mujuru way. If you remember, Joyce was not fired. Joyce walked away and saved herself any more humiliation at the hands of the First Lady and Mugabe himself. And it appears to me that Emerson doesn't seem to know what to do. One would have thought he'd just walk away, use health issues or just fatigue as an excuse. So it appears that he has decided to go through it until he's fired. Secondly, as I said earlier, the position of Vice President is an appointee position at the level of the party, and therefore one argument that come December conference, that is where Emerson will be given the marching orders at the discretion of the president himself. And it might be that this reshuffle is a holding position pending what may be a more thoroughgoing reshuffle after the conference in December.
Some observers say that the only shot that Lacoste has to resuscitate itself is if Mugabe dies before the elections, and then that means that Emerson Mnangagwa might have a chance.
I don't think so. I think over the last year, during which the succession struggle has been intense, I think that the Lacoste or the Emerson Mnangagwa faction has been systematically ring-fenced to a point where they don't pose a threat anymore to Mugabe. I think they are limping, they're devastated, they've been pruned so seriously that it's difficult to see how they can reassert themselves, let alone Emerson Mnangagwa himself. In my view, I think is a goner.
What about the First Lady herself, Grace Mugabe? Where does she fit in, in all these succession issues? Because it seems like the nation is spellbound by her antics. We seem to be captured by Grace.
Well, Grace, pronouncements over the last year, or even since 2014, she reads herself as the other side of the coin of the president. And so much so she doesn't think there's any necessity for her to have any more power than she has already. On a very practical level, I think that those who have made a distinction between what Mugabe wants or wants done and what Grace says and wants done, I think I'm making a mistake. I think at the end of the day, Grace says that which Mugabe wants. And in the end, Mugabe does what he wants to do, but using the First Lady as his agency, so to speak.
So how come he didn't give her a cabinet position?
She doesn't need it. She's more than a cabinet minister. She has said that many times. She doesn't need to be president. She is with the president. She says very clearly last Thursday that don't try to make a distinction between me and the president. To use her own term, we're one and the same person.
So with these latest developments, where does Sekremai fit in?
Well, I think basically if one looks at the dynamics, it appears that Mugabe and his wife are clearing the decks, clearing the obstacles, literally frustrating the Lacoste, and leaving him the latitude with which to appoint a successor if he chooses to retire before the election. If his health is failing, he would retire before the next elections. I think he's likely to retire before the next elections. But he's clearly, in my view, it appears he's carving out a succession model in which whoever succeeds him has the latitude and the platform with which to move forward. Whether this will mean going for elections in 2018 or carving out a GNU or even a model of the NTA, given that whoever comes in will need a strong enough political base and national level of national cohesion on the basis of which to engineer much needed economic reforms in the face of an economy that's collapsing.
It's clear from the videos that we are seeing at rallies that he doesn't look well. And so many people actually believe that is the reason why the G40 faction has been fighting hard to make sure that they have all their ducks in a row, because anything could happen to the president before the elections. But then on the other hand, some analysts say that this is going to be a legacy election like 2018, and there's no way that Mugabe is going to step down before the elections, that he needs to win this election.
No, I don't think so. I think once he has carved out a succession model, once he has done away with what he perceives as a threat to his power base, once he has neutralized the Emerson Mnangagwa threat, it doesn't matter whether he stands for election himself or his successor stands for the elections. He'll be there. He'll probably do Nyerere, where he remains president of the party, and it goes into the election. The important thing is that both he and his wife, if you remember, Grace said something to the effect that name the horse and we'll support it. And she exclaimed that you name the person who will run with the person. So really, I don't think that his presence, physical presence in the election is necessarily the a precondition for success. I think it is really ensuring that, one, he has that person that he wants to be elected as his successor, and he insists on election. And secondly, the kind of political buttressing, the political scaffolding that person will have with his help and that of his wife, and of a party which will therefore be unified around that person. And we're talking about less than 12 months away. And yes, it doesn't look physically well, but he's coherent. He's coherent. The last few weeks, watched him this evening on TV, he's very coherent. He's not staggering mentally. He may be staggering physically, but I think he's got his marbles all together at the moment.
And then just going back to look at some of those key ministries, like, for example, this whole issue of appointing the CIO boss, Bonongwe, to take over from Mnangagwa, to become the justice minister. Is this a strategic appointment to deal with the military, do you think, like to weaken people like Army General Constantine Chiwenga?
It sends a message. It set a precedent and an indication following Mugabe's speech a few months ago, where he said that the military chiefs, the security chiefs are going to be retired, and to quote him, we won't allow them to languish in poverty. We'll give them something to do. So there you are. So the first person, Onyongwe, out, retired from the security forces and given a political position, but one that in which he maintains his previous role, given that CIO intelligence is a key factor in the electoral process, given that the intelligence has been a key factor in ZEC, no doubt about that. So if it's true that Emerson was a key figure, a key cog in the electoral process over the last 2 decades, then clearly Bonyongwe is coming to take over that function, and with a lot of experience and a backdrop in the exercise of intelligence operations. We
had also heard that Chiwenga is going to be retired soon. What are you hearing regarding this?
That's the point I'm making. I said it sets the precedent that that these security chiefs are going to be retired, all of them, and Chiwenga included. That is the message behind Bonyongwe's removal from the security sector into politics. And I was saying that Mugabe made this point a few months ago when he made it clear that we were going to retire the security chiefs, but we won't allow them to languish. We'll give them something to do in the political arena, either as ministers, as ambassadors, whatever.
What do you make of Patrick Joao's latest appointment? Because some actually say whoever is in control of the pension fund now, runs the country.
It's in a region that those minister who controls NASA has a lot of latitude in how the NASA funds are used. No secret that almost every minister who has been in that position, including the outgoing, is said to have used NASA to the advantage of oneself or the faction from which he or she comes from. And it's no secret that Priska Mufumira was a strong Lacoste member, and that the other faction has been raising questions about the manner in which she has been utilizing or controlling NASA. So there she's a goner, and clearly the G40 have gained a key ministry with a major resource base of $3.5 billion.
What impact is this cabinet going to have on the country when you have people who are accused of massive corrupt activities, like Ignatius Chombo becoming a finance minister?
The performance criteria is secondary to the political rationale, the exercise of power, and it might be that Chombo, as I said earlier on, Chombo might just be a holding operation. It appears to me the priority is to get Chinamasa out of that because of the perception on the part of the other faction that is part of Lacoste, which I think is a pity, because I know Patrick Chinamasa very well. We're contemporaries. He's a very hard-working man and a very honest man.
What? Patrick Chinamasa, a hard-working man? An honest man?
Yes, I just said it.
Yeah, but many people disagree with you on that because of what we have seen happening in the country, especially to do with finance. And I remember interviewing former finance minister Tendai Biti, and he said he held Chinamasa responsible for the crisis that we had in the economy. So
no, I think the crisis, to be fair, Tendai gets overboard sometimes. The crisis in our country is structural. Okay, and no matter which minister comes into post, it's unlikely that that minister will resolve the problem. It's structural. Our structural problems reflect the fact that it's impossible to reform in my view, as long as Mugabe is there. And BT makes a lot of noise about this matter, but I think basically he would have come undone with the passage of time if he had remained long enough into where we are now. So I think we need to be very careful. Make a distinction between the individual who might be hardworking and focused and structural problems which go beyond the capacity or the latitude of the minister in place.
So Chinamasa is not responsible for the bond notes?
No, I don't. I think it was a state decision. I don't think that Chinamasa would have done anything on his own without his boss and the security establishment behind it.
But one of the reasons he has actually been demoted is because some of his colleagues in Zanu PF, especially in the G40, accuse him of having created, the recent shortages, and that apparently this was part of a plot or ploy by the Lacoste to create unrest in the country, so that when Mugabe went to the United Nations, when he went to New York, so that by the time he came back there will be chaos. Is this far-fetched?
If that's true, I don't see how Patrick was part of it. When he was the one to face the music about that, when he was the one to go on radio and television to try and defend that, to try and smother the fires. No, I don't think it was part of that. I don't doubt the possibility that there were malcontents who were trying to foment unrest as much now in the last week or so when the shortages were 2 days of unexplained panic. But likewise, last July, when we had those incidents in April, there's always been a suspicion that there's a faction within the state which will cause chaos. It's a pretext for a coup or unrest beyond which they could capitalize politically. I don't doubt that, but I would say I can't imagine Patrick Chinamasa being part of that. That would be far-fetched to imagine Patrick being a part of the chaos group. No.
But is it part of the Lacoste faction?
I don't think so. I think it's caught in the crossfire, in my view. Caught in the crossfire and lacking the political acumen, the political skills to play like others are able to play. He has been sacrificed. That's my view. But that's a personal view of a man I know.
For a long time, we have heard how the West are in a re-engagement mode with Zanu PF, and that their preferred candidate was or is Emmerson Mnangagwa. Do you think that perhaps this is the reason why someone like Walter Muzembe has been appointed Foreign Affairs Minister to destroy, those overtures, those Lacoste ambitions in the Foreign Ministry?
Well, I doubt. I don't think President Muzembe has the skills for that. I don't think. In my personal view, I don't think he's up to it at all. Minister of Foreign Affairs is largely a messenger, and in Zimbabwe, most ministers of foreign affairs are just beneficiaries of the head of state. Yes, It is true. The Lima initiative was meant to stabilize the economy, get us back in line with the international financial institutions, and so on and so forth. And behind that, it's also true that some Western embassies believed that Emmerson was the reformer. A difficult thing to accept, as I said to you in our last interview, given that Emmerson Mnangagwa has been part of the architecture of what we see as the pathological state that it is. And secondly, it is also true that some embassies may have inadvertently undermined his position in these chances. I remember one ambassador, whom I can't name, saying to me last year, Ibbo, what are you pushing this NTA, National Security Authority? Emmerson has been waiting for 40 years to become president, and you are trying to kill his chances through an NTA. I've never seen such partisanship on the part of an ambassador. And I had to tell the person that I've, in my understanding, and there was the allegation that I must know something inside. I don't. My conclusions, my views on succession are based on the intimate history of Zanu politics, and I've never seen Emmerson Mnangagwa as a contender, ever. And I think that he was put in contention by those kind of ambassadors, by sections of the media, and by a Eurocentric view of African politics, which is all about the big man syndrome, behind which Mugabe has thrived, behind which the Kamuzu Bandas have thrived. The idea that only big men can control the natives. And I've always been suspicious of these so-called benevolent Western countries who want to carve out our future for us. As I've said before, to hell with them.
Talking about suspicions, I understand, there's a report that Emmerson Mnangagwa presented to President Mugabe recently in response to the video that was presented to the Politburo by Professor Jonathan Moyo. And in that report by the Vice President, he apparently accuses you of being a coup plotter, that you are a G40 sympathizer and you've been working with Jonathan Moyo and others to try and destroy Zanu PF. What can you say about that? I'm sure you've seen the report.
I've seen the report, and if it is Emmerson Mnangagwa's report, I am shocked at the shallowness of the report. Firstly, it does not answer to the allegations which are leveled against Mnangagwa in Jonathan Moyo's report. Secondly, I'm dumbfounded as to why my name and Sapes Trust are brought into the narrative. I can understand his views and that of his supporters and others in Zanu PF, which is well known, the opposition to the NTA. Let's understand, but Jonathan Moyo too wrote against the NTA. There were no takers for the NTA, neither in the ruling party nor in the opposition. That's well known. And our position on the NTA was clearly non-partisan. It was an insistence that the government should abdicate, and a neutral set of Zimbabwean technocrats, non-partisan, including ensuring that even those of us pushing the NTA would not be part of the NTA, who would for 2 years at least run the government, report to Parliament, and cause both political and economic reforms. So clearly, it was not partisan in any way at all, not at all. And it was not aligned to any faction. In fact, one would say both factions were not bought into, didn't buy into the idea of the NTA. So I found that very crazy.
What about where he says Sapes Trust is CIA funded?
I was shocked to see that nonsense, and I'm told from my own sources that some of those who helped Emmerson Mnangagwa put that report together are CRO functionaries, some of whom were students at Sapes for the MPS. This one individual in particular, I believe he was my student, together with Opa Mchunguri and Albert Mpofu, as an MPS student at Sapes Trust, whose reputation is well known as a regional organization, non-partisan. It's a forum for anyone who wants to have something to say. We have had Patrick Chinamasa there, the governor of the Reserve Bank. We have had almost everybody. Morgan Tsvangirai himself. You know about our policy dialogue forum. For people who are supposed to have come from an intelligence background to utter such nonsense that I have been to Sweden, that I have been working with a Swedish agent. Firstly, I don't even know that a Swedish man who mentioned Carl somebody. Secondly, I have not been to Sweden last year. The last time I was in Sweden was 1999. Almost 20 years ago. Immigration is there to know when we leave the country. I was shocked at such nonsense.
Many people feel that even though Zanu PF is fighting like this, they will, the people in Zanu PF, they will still unite for that one event, which is the elections in 2018. So one has to ask, where is the opposition in all this while the Zanu PF house is on fire right now?
The opposition in Zimbabwe is an obliging and complicit opposition, particularly since they experienced the GNU. What do I mean by obliging and complicit? If the opposition, in particular the NDCT, wanted to collapse the Mugabe regime, all that to do was to walk out of parliament tomorrow and furthermore declare, as Kenyans, Raila, NASA have said, no reforms, no elections, a position which they've taken a year or two ago. So basically they are party to the situation that we have in our country. And indeed, given the trajectory of the election process and the precedents that we have seen the last 4 elections, there's little to believe that the outcome will be any different from what it was in the past. The second is that I don't believe that ZANU really needs elections, even though I know that they have used the elections as a way of legitimizing the illegitimate, in my view. Because after all this, one might ask, you finish Lacoste, you finish with the opposition, in the manner in which I have just described them, the opposition. Then what? The economy is in shambles. It's collapsing. The government is almost virtually moribund. I think that it brings back on the table the idea of the National Transition Authority to begin anew by using a bunch of technocrats, 18 technocrats, to put our country back on the rails and before the next elections. And I hope that at the end of the day, the successionists, whether G40 or Lacoste, will realize that one faction winning this round is not the solution. And there are bigger issues ahead of us. The urgent need for political and economic reforms in our country. That is our.
And I guess the biggest problem is that there's a leadership crisis in both Zanu PF and the NDC, because it would look like both parties have failed to groom new leaders. Just the other day, we saw a report from NDC official Eddie Cross saying that Morgan Tsvangirai is in fact very sick and might not be well enough to contest in the elections next year. Tsvangirai has in the past revealed that he has cancer. So it appears that the NDC is lost without Tsvangirai and is completely overwhelmed right now.
Yes, it's true. Rightly or wrongly, Tsvangirai has become the brand of the opposition in Zimbabwe, thanks to his own reputation as a brave Zimbabwean. And I really wish him well health-wise. But I am annoyed at De Cross's mutterings about the health of his party leader. Is he the doctor? Does he understand that in our culture you don't go ranting around about someone's health in that manner and appearing to be an authority on Zimbabwean politics? I think it was in bad taste what he said. And I've heard reliably that Morgan Tsvangirai is nowhere near the kind of condition that our friend De Cross is talking about, And I must ask, under what authority does he speak on the condition of Morgan Tsvangirai? He's not the party spokesman. He's not a medical specialist. He's not privy, from what I heard, to Morgan Tsvangirai's condition. And having said that, it is true that the speculation about Morgan's health does throw into disarray the fortunes of the opposition on the eve of a would-be election. The more reason I would say that the opposition should adopt a different strategy, not one given inexorably to elections, but more towards a kind of discussion around the kind of stuff we're talking about, the NTA. It will not be possible for them as an opposition, whether it's MDCT on its own or as the neutered MDC alliance, to produce a replacement for Tsvangirai should he be found not healthy enough to face the rigors of an election campaign. So we are stuck. And in that regard, maybe one might say that Zanu PF have moved far. They appear in 1 year to be resolving the succession problem within their party. That they appear to have already an indication as to how the succession thing might pan out. And as I said earlier on, it may not be necessary to have the person of Mugabe in the election campaign next year for Zanu PF to win the elections. The backdrop of the electoral process, the fact that there are no reforms, all that makes it almost a bygone conclusion that Zanu PF will win the elections. So,
right.
To answer your question, yes, the opposition are in a mess.
Right, and then also just to finish on that issue of Eddie Cross, quite a few people have said that it was insensitive of him to actually reveal that information. It was not his place to do that. But on the other hand, some will say this is what happens when these political parties do not communicate with the people. Even with Mugabe, we never know what's really wrong with him. All we know that he goes to Singapore.
I think the condition in which our country finds itself politically, the squabbling in both the ruling and the opposition parties, the uncertainty as to how the elections will pan out, whether it will pan out peacefully or otherwise, above all, the economic situation in which we find ourselves, and which it is almost impossible to imagine an economic turnaround as long as Mugabe is there, and as long as the succession issue is not resolved. And as I've said elsewhere, and it is difficult to see things beginning to happen to improve as long as things are what they are. I would again join the call that we should have a national dialogue and look at the possibility of a national transition authority scaffolded by an international conference on Zimbabwe on reconstruction to mobilize resources far beyond those required for paying our debts, to institute a economic reform program and reconstruction, which also involves the diaspora. We have 4 million Zimbabweans outside, 70% of whom are our professionals outside there, and a chunk of which are contributing almost 2 billion a year in remittances to home. We need a framework through which we can reintegrate our diaspora into the national program of reform and reconstruction. First and foremost, that is my plea.
We all know, as you said earlier, what the political parties on both sides have said about this whole issue of the NTA, but I hope that sometime soon we can revisit this issue and talk a bit more about the pros and cons of an NTA. But for now, thank you for talking to us on the program Hot Seat, Dr. Mandaza.
You've been listening to the program Hot Seat with Violet Gonda.